But first, let me say that I understand the desire for this bill. I know what it is to watch someone die, and that's why this campaign is so hard for me. I have no moral objection in principle to assisted suicide, um, but I have spent 25 years as a disabled person in this country, and I am intimately familiar with the medical, social care, and social security systems that this bill would operate within. And I know that there is currently no way for us to make it safe. This isn't about a few fringe cases of abuse or regret. I'm going to talk a bit more about consent and choice later, but I want to quote my friend Gabrielle Peters, who's been fighting MAID in Canada. She said, "This is not to question the competence of a person, but to question the competence of the state and ask whether it is fit to become involved in the business of killing its citizens." So 20 years ago, we warned you that disabled people would die from social security changes. And here we are, at the very least, thousands of dead people later. And I was nearly one of them. I attempted suicide after a DWP tribunal. And no one has answered for any of it. And not only have no changes been made to save us with all that evidence, but consecutive governments have doubled down, including this one. At the beginning of COVID, disabled people warned you that our lives would be deprioritized by doctors who see our lives as tragedies, and we were called defamatory and hysterical. And now we know about all the people who had DNRs imposed without knowledge or consent because doctors thought it was a kindness to let them die. And no one has answered for it. And this happened across the country. It is a core failure of the way medical systems treat disabled people, not just a couple of rogue doctors. And now we're telling you this will lead to the deaths of disabled people, as it has done in many other places where this has already been legalized, because we live in a society where our needs are not met, which imposes isolation and suffering, and where the system that you want to entrust with the guardrails is the same system where people imposed DNRs without consent. We are begging you to listen this time. I have a fluctuating condition, and I have spent years at a time housebound, often mostly bedbound. I can tell you without a single shadow of a doubt that if this option had been available to me in the early years, I would have taken it. I had conversations with friends about how if they found me after a suicide attempt, they shouldn't call for help. And they agreed, because this belief is so deeply embedded in our society that if you get sick and you don't recover, suicide is the natural solution. It's expected. It's obvious. I can't tell you how many people have told me over the years that they would have killed themselves if they had my life. It took me years to meet other disabled people who showed me another way to live, that I could still have a life. At the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote a small book called Your Life Is Not Over because I was so scared for all the people newly disabled by COVID who wouldn't have the opportunity to meet people who could tell them there were options other than recovery or suicide. I've had to fight for decades for diagnoses and treatment which give me the capacity to carve out the life that I have. Chronically ill people experience a very different medical system to the one most people do. We've experienced the fight to be taken seriously, to be treated. And yet, despite the harm we've experienced from the DWP and the medical system, we rely on both for survival. It's exhausting. So, when suicide reporting guidelines are very clear about the danger to at-risk populations of talking as if suicide is a reasonable response to a situation, we understand the responsibility not to write articles about healthy people's suicides where we imply this was an understandable outcome. But everywhere we look, in our politics, our media, our families, our news, disabled people get told that suicide is not just natural, it's the best option for us and for our families. So when we talk about coercion, we're not just talking about the epidemic of hidden abuse of disabled people by their carers or a beneficiary trying to get the inheritance. We are talking about society-wide coercion by oppression and discrimination. When disabled people's needs are not met because they can't get the care they need, family members often have to leave their jobs or burn themselves out trying to do both. If my husband, if I get bad again, if my husband has to leave his critical job at a hospital to take care of me, how can I not see myself as a burden? How do I overcome the messages that it would be better for everyone if I wasn't here, especially if my government provides it as an essential service? Studies have shown that more than half of people would prefer death to being disabled, and that number increases according to wealth, which means people in power are making decisions based on their own imagined futures and not the actual reality that disabled people live with today. We hear it all the time, especially in politics, where people talk about needing someone to wipe your arse as undignified. It can be, but it's only that way because we keep creating and reinforcing a society where needing help is lacking dignity. There is nothing more undignified about needing help with toileting than needing help making your clothes or cooking a meal. People born with conditions which mean they need that help all their lives are not ashamed of it, it's just how it is. But because healthy people think it's the end of the world, it's been used to make people afraid. When we make a society where asking for help is shameful, but asking for death is dignity, we will kill people. So I'm begging you to vote no on Friday because people like me are everywhere. People who get sick and don't know enough disabled people who can guide them and who think that the world is over, who think that our lives have ended and that the people around us are suffering because we need them to help us. These are the systems that we live in, and we currently cannot make them safe. Until we are assisted to live, we can't be allowing an assisted suicide bill to go through. Thank you.